All right, Emma, if you want to get started, and then I'll keep letting people in as they come, but we can get rolling.
That sounds good. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Photos for Stories. My name is Emma Bublitz. I am a content strategist with the CALS communications team. I just started in December with the team, so I'm still somewhat new, but excited to meet all of you. And Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Chris Liotta. I'm a video producer. This summer, I'm going on 6 years with CALS. So I've been here for a little bit at this point. But yeah, so I'm here to kind of help offer a little bit of insight into the storytelling aspect of photos and how to capture those in partnership with Emma. So thank you all for joining us.
Yes, and if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to send them right in the chat and we'll try and answer them as we go. Otherwise, we'll have some time at the end for questions as well.
And oh, sorry, quick note. Apparently the mood lighting in my office is dying, and if the lights behind me start flashing, I apologize, but this lighting looks way better than the overheads. So if it starts flashing behind me, don't worry, the electricity isn't dying on me.
All right, thanks, Chris. So we probably all heard of the somewhat cheesy statement of that pictures are worth a picture is worth 1,000 words, and they definitely have a large impact on stories and then the story experience for the readers. And then they can also have a big effect on NC State itself and its brand. So we wanted to start out the presentation here with first and foremost, when you're choosing photos for your stories, it's important to make sure they align with the NC State brand. And that says, and this information is available on the branding website for NC State under imagery. In content and style, NC State imagery is big, bold, and beautiful. Our photography and video reflect momentum, optimism, and the gravity and world-changing potential of our work. So to start out with, why do we need photos for our stories? So photos can certainly enhance the story and provide additional information to the reader. And oftentimes, as I mentioned, the story, a photo can tell the story better than words can. So you, of course, want to have really strong copy within your story too, but photos can help share the story a little bit better in a lot of cases than just copy on its own. So you can share details, you can explain to the reader, show the reader really how what the scene looks like, who was all there, what were people feeling, and really just place the reader in the story that they're reading. So it ultimately helps share the story a bit better than just strong copy will. It also can capture the attention of the reader. So let's say you have a really powerful, if you're talking for a digital story, you have a really powerful feature image or on social media, and it can help convince the reader to click on your story, of course, with the assist of a great headline or excerpt or social media copy, but it can really help grab the reader's attention to go click on the story, which is what we ultimately want people to do. And then, or for a print magazine, let's say someone's paging through like a print copy of like a magazine or something. If they see a great photo, it might convince them to stop and read the story. So that also kind of leads into the that pictures can help set the tone of the story. Are we feeling, or should the reader feel like happy? Should they feel sad? I hope not, but feel sad. Should they be excited? Should they be worried? It really helps place the reader again in the story and feel what they should be feeling. Again, of course, with strong copy as well within the story. And lastly, it just makes the pages look nice, whether that's digital or in a magazine. It really helps make the page look beautiful and overall contribute to the reader experience. So here are some examples of some good photo storytelling. Some of these photos are from stories that we've done in CALS News or the magazine. A lot of them are just from the NC State Photos, the photo shelter site too under CALS. So these have been taken by university photographers. So for example, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but this photo was just recently used in a story with one of a grad student, looking at some plants that she's studying with in relation to space. So I thought the lighting was great in here. There's a lot of great color options. There's some details here, scope. So these are just some examples of some good storytelling, and Chris will go kind of back and forth and explain some of the more of the details of taking photos and what makes for a good photo.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk a little bit about some principles of photography. We have actually done quite a few workshops overall on photography and video, whether it's we got a couple, I think 2 months ago we did one, my counterpart did one on specifically taking photos and video with your cell phone. So we have a lot of resources if you want to kind of learn more about that practice. This is going to be kind of very surface level type stuff because it's more about the act of, or how of incorporating them into your story, but just to kind of make sure we're all on a level playing field with the act of taking photos and also video, as a lot of these principles do apply into from photo to video. They kind of share a lot of the same principles. Emma brought up the picture's worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to shamelessly plug and say, if a picture's worth 1,000 words and there's one photo in every 24, if there's 24 photos in every second of video, then what's a 2-minute video worth? Anyways, jumping into it, rule of thirds. This is kind of a very like the groundwork of image compositions. And the easiest way I can think to explain it to you, if you have never heard of this, this is going to be like a glass shattering moment. But basically place a giant tic-tac-toe board on any photo, and where you get those little cross sections are typically where you want to align the subject matter of your photos, because that's just kind of where our eyes are drawn when we take in a photo. And so even if you look at this one photo, the first photo with the woman, I believe she's in the greenhouse, she's in the upper left third. Like she's right where her eyes are, right where that cross section is. And it's an appealing photo. It kind of lets us see beyond her. We get a lot of the greenhouse behind her, but she's in a very nice space. She's got enough headroom above her. She's not chopped off down below. It's just a very nice way to compose a photo. And if you're thinking of the horizontal lines on a tic-tac-toe board, the top line is typically like a horizon line. We've got some nature photos later on you see, but if you're thinking about like where the sky meets the ground and in photography, that's typically where you'll see it. And it's a good principle to think about as you're taking photos. All of these, I will say, is going to up your personal photography game if you start practicing when you're just taking like family photos and all that kind of stuff. These are all really great overall to just kind of know. All the rules or principles that I always say you have to know the rules so you know why you're breaking them, because there are plenty of reasons to not do these things, to not compose on one of the thirds. And there is a purpose to them. You just have to know why you're doing it and not doing it willy-nilly. Leading lines. There's a couple examples in here. I've got a couple later on, but that's typically thinking of using your environment to kind of either nicely compose a photo. You can have like lots of lines physically in the environment going the same way. There's a little bit with the ridge on the leaf. On the photo on the slide, that's a leading line being used from the actual composition. But you can also think of it to kind of tell the story of the photo. How do you want the viewer to take in the photo? What's the journey that you want them to go on as you sort of, present information, reveal information? What are you trying to get from them? So leading lines can just be a way to nicely organize your photo, or you can use it to actually move the viewer through the image. And it can be a 2-second journey, and that's fine, but you're doing it with a purpose. Depth, this is going to vary greatly depending on what you're using to take your photos. Obviously, if you're on your cell phone, you're not going to have as much control on depth as you will if you're on a DSLR or a more traditional camera. But depth can be used, whether that's, you want to have a nice soft background behind people so that they're the key image, or the opposite, where if you want to really collapse the image because you want it to feel, you're taking a photo in like a cityscape and you want it to feel cramped. You want people to feel like they're on top of each other. That's when you use That's when you don't want shallow depth of field. You want to kind of stack the images on top of each other. Lighting, this is going to be a little bit tricky because you're often relying on what's in the area, because most of you aren't going to be using, professional lighting equipment in a lot of situations. I will say flash is great, but it has its places. It's basically flooding an image with a big flash of light in one moment, and that can kind of kill any sort of visual composition that you are trying to achieve. And you have to really know how to control it and know what you're using it for. There's obviously the best light you can use in a lot of these situations. I'm pretty sure every single one of the photos that's on this slide was taken being lit with sunlight. And obviously that's great, but you have to be considerate of making sure that if someone's facing into the sun, they're going to be squinting, and that doesn't make for a very nice photo. If you're thinking about if it's a really bright day, there's going to be a lot of really, really heavy shadows. And also thinking of the time of day, because if you're filming we try to schedule a lot of our outdoor shoots around between 9 and 11 o'clock when we're doing interviews, because if you think about where the sun is in the horizon, it's kind of on that low angle. But if you're shooting at noon, when the sun's directly above people, you're getting a lot of really heavy down shadows, and no one looks good with top down lights casting shadows from their brow across their face. That's why I have these lights on instead of my overheads, because well, here, I'll show you. So I have that versus this, and it's not as good. So it's just little things like that can kind of really make or break the imagery. So so lighting, you can also have a lot of fun with lighting. I love using desk lamps and all that kind of stuff to kind of light people, or to make something pop in the background. You can get creative with it. You have a lot of freedom, but you have to be conscious of it, because you can use light to help tell your story. Location, obviously, this is kind of dependent on what you're there to photograph. But I always say that don't think of the location in this sense as well, I'm in a greenhouse, I can only do this. Think of it as, what's your background? Let's take Zoom, for example. Everyone went crazy starting in 2020 with having Zoom backgrounds and virtual backgrounds. And they wanted to use them in a lot of the video interviews I was doing. And I had to keep telling people that Zoom wasn't great at keying out, and they were losing chunks of their head. And I would much rather, because it was just it would chop out whatever. And so they would just be in and out. It was a mess. And so I tell people, I don't care if you're in your office, if your office behind you is neat and orderly. Just, think about it and just make sure it's a clean background. There's nothing distracting. There's not something that's going to pull attention where you don't want it behind. So when you're thinking of location in that sense, be thinking of that. You want to dictate where the attention in the photo goes. And then there's a little plug for that workshop I mentioned before. Emma, if you would dial back a slide. Oh, other way. So let's just think real quick, taking some of those principles that we had. I'd say the first thing that you notice with this one, if you're thinking rule of thirds, is 4 of the 6 of these photos are kind of, or the cow one's a little bit in the middle. But so 3 of the 6 are dictated by the rule of thirds. You have the people in the field, the woman in the lab, and the man. They're all kind of on one of those intersection points. And then the cow and then the man in the grain silo kind of break that, but they're doing it for a purpose. The one in the grain silo in particular is kind of there to kind of show that sort of immense feel around him and how big everything is. If you're looking at it from a lighting perspective, obviously the other ones, they're all lit very well. The cow one in particular, the light is actually creating one of those leading lines with the lens flare you see. It's kind of guiding your eyes towards the cow. And then you also have a little bit of the creative lighting with that purple light that Emma was talking about earlier, where it's kind of really, it's illuminating her, but it's also showing that, that's where the light's coming from. It's drawing your eyes in. And then, Emma, you can go forward a little bit. I promised you that this would make your selfies look better. So, but this one I put in here just to kind of show why rule of thirds is important if you're just taking portraits. Because while you can center it, doing it on a third lets you see a lot more of the world around the person. So I'm on the upper right third with my eye line, but you can kind of see the mountainscape behind me. You can see everything around me. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the horizon line, that's kind of on that top third. That's where you're looking at with that. Next one, Emma. This one, I brought in, all these were also taken on a cell phone. This one I was using to kind of illustrate for leading lines, to kind of guide you through, because when you come into the photo, the landscape lines, that kind of archway kind of draws you down in that little semicircle into the ramp up to me going down the mountain. It's a kind of natural line formation that kind of guides you through the image as you take it in. And then next one. So I put this one in here, and to get a reaction, which I can see I got from a couple people, but this one I wanted to use for the idea of leading lines to tell the story. This one to me is in it to tell the story of a dog going to PetSmart, and the leading lines are you follow her eye line to the out of focus PetSmart behind her. And it's a 2-second reaction, but you show this photo to people and they smile and they get a laugh. It's a simple photo. It's honestly, like, I did not compose this one very well, because like you've got the little thing on the left, my windshield is dirty beyond heck. So like that's when you get into the location a little bit better, but you can kind of see the power that you can have with leading lines, because even though you can't see her eyes, you see where my dog is looking, and you can kind of follow that from her to PetSmart, and you get that 2-second reaction. You want to get people to feel something, and that's how you can kind of use these principles to get those reactions from people. So you can go to the next one, Emma.
All right, so now that we've learned how to take photos from Chris, now we'll talk about how to pick photos for your story. So let's say you have a lot of great options, which is the ideal world, of course, to have lots of photos and you don't even option to choose. So first and foremost, or I'd say at least at the beginning, we should talk about having, so make sure you have good quality of your photos. So make sure that the photos aren't low resolution, they're not blurry, they're not poor lighting. Chris talked a lot about lighting, and just make sure that it goes, kind of going back to the brand, it's bright, it's bold, if possible. And I know there's a lot of situations that Chris was also talking about location, whether it's like a dark research lab, or a really bright field where this might get kind of tricky, but these are things to aim for to make your story look good and the readers will be engaged. With the choices too, you should also make sure to be intentional. Every photo in a story should serve a purpose. So whether it's sharing something new about the story that wasn't necessarily fully explained within the copy, like the color of things or the texture of things, where it is in proximity to maybe another piece of equipment or something like that, those photos can show that better than you might be able to explain. So whether it's something new or just to show something that's already written a little bit better, just make sure to be intentional, to not just place photos just to fill the page. I like to avoid simple headshots if possible in our stories. It's much better and more engaging, I think, to see like an action shot or a really nice headshot in like a with a great background, plants or field or something, instead of just a professional headshot sitting in the chair with the background. Those are great, but if possible, it's great to use other things too that show the story a little bit better than a professional headshot would. I love detail shots too, especially with a mix of the larger scope pictures. So like for example, with these hemp leaves here with a very clean background, the texture and the ridges on the leaves, I just think that's cool and interesting to look at when I'm reading a story. But be sure to mix with the larger scopes too, so that people can understand what they're reading about and what kind of where they are reading about. Next thing is variety. So that kind of goes back to the mix of close-ups and larger scopes, and show different people or different actions that are all, of course, still within the story and where it makes sense. So just remember still to make it interesting, but still cohesive. The picture should look like they're meant to be placed together. They're not random. If it is somewhat not random, but less cohesive, make sure you explain in the caption what the readers are looking at and kind of how it relates to the story itself.
And then orientation, me being a video person, I'm very partial to kind of landscape, the kind of longer than they are tall, but in today's day and age, especially with social media, vertical photos definitely have a place. So this is to say to be conscious of why you're framing it the way you are, vertical, horizontal. They both can serve a purpose, and that can be whether it's visually to tell the story, or if it's going to be where you're like if you're taking a photo to go on social media, it's probably better to do it vertically. If you're doing one specifically for Instagram, you kind of have to think about that square box layout, so that be conscious of it. I would say default to horizontal over vertical, but that could also just be my video bias.
And I'll say too, all of our stories, the horizontal fits much better in our layouts than the vertical do.
Yeah, so it's a just know why you're doing it and know where you want to use it and what you want to use it for with that regard, because there is a place for both, but a lot of our platforms tend to favor the landscape orientation. Emotion, Emma actually brought up a very good point with using not using headshots. And headshots are very clean, very dry, and you get the information, you get who the person is, but it doesn't tell the story of the person. You can, if you take what might be classified as a headshot, but you take them out of that background and put them maybe in the field or in the lab where they're doing, just that little dimension can add a little bit of emotion to the story you're trying to tell. You're trying to make people feel something. You want to give them as much information as possible, as much emotional information about what they're trying to feel. The photo of the woman in the field, I think she's got tomatoes, but you look at that, odds are you're going to feel happy because she's smiling and she's basically looking directly at you because she's looking at the lens. That's kind of dictating how you want someone to feel when they experience this photo. You thinking about how you want to frame things can also dictate the emotion. So if you are shooting top down, if you basically take this woman in the field and shoot her top down versus looking up at her. Traditionally, if you're shooting downward, that kind of makes people feel smaller, insignificant. It kind of puts the viewer on a higher plane than them, and versus if you're shooting up at them, it tends to make people appear more powerful, more authoritative, and all those emotions are driven by the choices you make in the field. Scope as part of this visually interesting visually interesting bit. Think back to that photo in the grain silo. Emma, if you want to actually dial back to slide 4, just it might be easier to show people. So bottom middle one, if you can, just kind of put yourself as the photographer in that situation, and then take that photo, and then imagine taking the same photo but 2 feet behind that person. Do you get the same feel from a photo directly behind that person with that I assume it's grain, I might be wrong, but do you get the same feel of how grand this area is, how big it is, if you're directly behind that person versus all the way back as we are? That's what providing scope can do. That's what can kind of dictate that emotion with that story. And then colors, we are a little bit blessed because we go to a lot of beautiful landscapes and there's a lot of bright colors. I was just filming yesterday in a plant nursery, so it was like colors galore. Like, what do you want? Pink, you want purple, you want blue. So a lot of stuff I could use to kind of to play with. But if you're thinking in a more traditional sense, let's go back to this woman with the tomatoes. There's a lot of green in there. There's a lot of green. She's in the field, the stakes are green. She's holding a green bucket, but she kind of pops out because of her red shirt. And that's how you're using color to your advantage. How are you making her stand out? How are you making her pop? Conversely, this is, if you're filming if you're taking a photograph up against a red wall, you may not want her to wear red because then she's going to bleed into the wall and she's going to look like a floating head. So just being conscious of the colors and the environment and what you're trying to use to dictate. Also, there's a lot that you can go into of color theory and how certain colors make people feel certain things. You can read as much as you want into that. I generally try to think of colors and more of how you can use it so that you're more in the line with, you know, how can you make people stand out? How are you drawing people's eye lines? There's a lot to be said about, you know, what people feel when they see the color red. But as NC State, we have a lot of red, so we kind of have to work with that. And then patterns. This one gets really tricky, especially with video, because certain cameras don't play well with like gingham patterns and really tight, like houndstooth. So in a sense, you know, being conscious of, especially shirts people are wearing, a solid color like the one I'm wearing or the red like that woman is wearing, those will generally photograph, you will not have to worry about them and how they will play. Patterns can be distracting. They can draw attention from the photo away from where you as the photographer want it to be. It's not, again, not to say there's not a place for it, but you just have to kind of, if people will sometimes ask, you know, what they should wear to shoots, and generally I say, you know, a solid color tee. And if I can give specifics on, you know, what color, depending on the situation, but generally we default to just a solid neutral-ish color. Patterns in the other sense are think about patterns in your environment that you might want to use to your advantage because you want something to pop out. You want something to break a natural pattern. That's, unfortunately, I don't have a photo to kind of point to that, but if you think about how a pattern might exist in an environment, and then you have something that breaks that, that's instantly going to draw the attention of the viewer right to that spot, because we as humans are naturally predicated to recognize patterns. And so if you break it, that's where the eyes are going to go right away. So again, using these sort of principles to your advantage. I talked a little bit earlier about checking background. I'm going to say it again. You will never have as much control in this entire process as when you do in the field. And photography, video, all that work, it's all about control. You're out in the field. You may feel like you don't have control, but just wait till you take that photo and you're trying to fix it in Photoshop and you realize there's something you could have done in the moment to make your life a lot easier. So just be really conscious when you're in the field about what you can do to be doing yourself a favor later on, because you will be surprised at how much you can manipulate and control in the field to get the image that you want to tell the story you want, and how limited you are with all the tools. You know, in Photoshop, you use a bottomless well, but you will be surprised at how much more ability you have in the field to make those changes than you do with a program like Photoshop. And Photoshop's great. It's super powerful. I love it, but it's almost always better to capture it better in the moment.
Yeah, and I'll add to with the background. So let's say someone that you're writing a story about already has some photos that are usable, they're good quality, they fit with the brand and everything too, but make sure to check the background of their photos that they send to us if you're not in the moment getting to choose what's in the background. I've received a few pictures like from tailgates and stuff like that where we didn't want what was going on in the back, maybe in our pictures on our website. So situations like that too, and like especially groups of people, that just double check that there's nothing in the background that you wouldn't want on your website as well.
I'll just kind of add to that. If you're getting photos from someone else, definitely check the backgrounds, because I can guarantee you anyone taking photos just naturally in the moment at an event is not going to be conscious of what's happening behind them. They're going to be focused in on what they're taking the photo of. And that's fine, because they aren't taking the photo for the story, but you are. They're not thinking about that. You should be. But so if you're getting photos from somebody, make sure you take in the whole photo before you put it on your website.
All right, so now that you've chosen your great photos for your story, it's very likely that you'll have to resize to fit the format of wherever you're posting the story. So I personally like to make it easy for myself, and I use Canva. I'm not sure if any of you have used it yet, but there's a free version of it that you can do a lot of what you'll need to do with the free version. The premium version has a few more features, and another plug for another workshop next month is on Canva and designing on Canva. So we can share some more details at the end of this presentation about that. But you can, within Canva, you can create a template of the specified size that you need, and then you can just drop the photos in, and I'll show you a tutorial of that. But for example, our feature images for CALS News is 1500 by 844 pixels. So I have that size ready to go in Canva. I download the picture, and I'll show you that in a tutorial in the next slide. Download the picture and just plop it in and download, and it's ready, ready to go. So I know other people will use things like Photoshop or other software, but Canva works really well for me, and it has for a while now. So I'll show you, and then you can just download it and upload it to your library in WordPress. So here is a screen record with Canva. So we're starting here with the NC State Photos, the Photo Shelter website, which everyone should have access to, and there's instructions online on how to get access to use those photos, and some more information about permissions and stuff like that. But all right, so you're here on the NC State Photos. You can go to the galleries, and then I'm going to CALS here. And so for example, here's again those photos that we just used recently. I'd like to choose that one. You can download it. And then Canva, here's my already made template for the CALS for the feature images. So I'm just confirming here the 1500 by 844 pixels. And then if you go to uploads, then you can just drop that in there, and then you just drag it right on over. You'll see, and it fits perfectly there. Again, this is a landscape picture. Our websites kind of favor those. Download it as a PNG file. It'll automatically name it to like Untitled Design 15 or something like that, but you can rename it, and you should rename it for the file itself. Actually, it was 38. I've clearly done quite a few of these already. But so that's the easiest way that I found to do it. Again, everyone has different ways that they like to do it, whatever makes sense for you. But I like it because you can make the easy sizes right to it and drag it in and download. Chris, you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I typically resize in Photoshop just because it's what I'm used to and what I know. But in Photoshop, it's I believe it's Command Option I. It's either Command Option I or Command Control I. I always get them mixed up on a Mac. But it's a keyboard shortcut, and it pops up the image resizing, and you just type in 1500 844. You might have to delink it because Photoshop sometimes defaults to linked aspect ratios. And so if you change one, it'll automatically change the other. And so if you just like unclick the little chain link, and you can do them individually, but you just type in 1500 844, click apply, photos done, save it as a PNG, upload it. But that's typically what I use, and it's not as intimidating as you might think, either of these options. And it's just kind of get in there and kind of, once you get the flow of things, you'll be able to resize without even thinking about it.
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with. So then now you have the photos, they're to the right size that you need, at least for the feature images. So now you're ready to do the actual page layout. So when you upload the pictures, you can either do it, some people prefer to upload them all that you know you're going to use right away into the media library. Some people like to open a new post or something first in WordPress and then do your copy and place them in. It's kind of however you your process and whatever you like to do for it. But when you do go and upload the pictures, you'll want to make sure that you have alt text for the pictures. You're going to want to make sure that about your title, and I'll go into that a little bit more about what we do for the title. Captions, including, and we'll talk about this more, about photo credits. And then our team has been really focused recently on organization of our photos. As you might imagine, we have a lot of photos in our media library that we've used for photos or for stories over over the years. So we've been working on organizing them just to make our lives a little bit easier and be able to find photos a little bit easier. So we have photos or folders, I mean, for like people, food, farms, campus, research, and then some other ones too. And then those folders are even broken into separate like subfolders. So headshots, like plants versus edible versus not edible plants, howling cow, of course, and then students too. So those are just some examples of some that we do. But that way, let's say you're looking for, you know, a picture of some sort of fruit, but you don't know yet which maybe what fruit you want, or like an animal, but not sure which animal you want. Then you can just go into those folders and kind of scroll through and see what you're looking for the picture. But we also have been working on titling our photos very well too. So if it's a picture of a blueberry, make sure you have blueberry, you know, in there, and then you can easily search within the media library as well for those photos. And then we've been trying to clean out photos too that aren't in stories, just so we don't have a bunch of photos in a million different sizes of each photo and stuff like that. So one of our new team members, Leanne, who's helping with the photo or the workshop next month, was helping us with that organization. So going back to the layout too, page preview is your friend. So at the top of the post, the new post that you're creating, there's a button preview, and you can preview it in desktop, mobile, or tablet. So once you have all of the copy in, all the pictures that you want in there, or that you think you're wanting for any other design elements, if you click that preview button in the 3 different formats, you can see how, like if there's text wrapping, or if alignment's weird, or for example, if it looks a little bit too cluttered, we want our stories to look clean and clear, and maybe there's too many photos and it looks too cluttered. So it does help you visualize in the format that the reader would be experiencing the story in. And while you're doing that, you should think about the scrolling experience. So whether it's desktop, mobile, or tablet, make sure that the page isn't too busy. And let's say on the opposite end, the page doesn't look not busy enough, but it looks a little bare or maybe a little bit too text heavy. If you have a longer story, not enough pictures, you can also do things like pull quotes within the story too, where it's the larger text with, I think it's bolded, and a lot of times, I don't know if it's the same for all the websites, but ours goes in red. So choose like a really prominent, impactful quote, and that helps fill some space and make it visually interesting if you don't have all the photos in the world, you know, in the most ideal scenario to fill up your story. So there's things you can play around with, and page preview does help in that scenario, just to see everything. I'm sorry.
Okay. Stock libraries are the bane of my existence, whether it's music or photos, because while they are handy and you will typically find something you can use, they are a bottomless pit that you can fall into for an endless amount of time as you search. So everyone always wants to know if there's tips or tricks for navigating the libraries. And unfortunately, there's no tried and true method that you can expand to all of them, because I forget where I've heard this quote, but the idea that computers are only as smart as the people using them. Stock libraries are dictated, and your ability to search them are dictated based on the keyword searches or that have been set for the libraries. So it can change. Like if I'm in a music library, I tend to search based on emotion, because that's more of the general overarching thing that I can do. Like, what do I want this music to make someone feel? But in photo libraries, that doesn't necessarily apply, because people don't typically categorize photos based on emotion. And so you can think about, whether, if you have a story on corn, you can keyword search corn, and that'll probably get you some good stuff. But, maybe you want to do cornfield or corn harvester, you can try to be as specific as you want. That can also, unfortunately, limit you. So I would try thinking of multiple ways that you can phrase what you're looking for, and think about different approaches that you can take to getting it, because that'll kind of broaden your scope, your search scope, to encapsulate as much as you can to make sure you're getting what you want. As I said, they are a bottomless pit. So if you find a photo that works for you and you really like, you can spend another 30 minutes to an hour looking for photos, or you can go with the one that you think works for your story and is good. You can spend as much time as you choose to put in here. So we have a couple different options down here. Emma's already talked about the NC State photos, Canva. One that we use a lot is iStock. They tend to have a pretty good diversity of photos and a pretty deep library. Obviously, the iStock costs money, so it's kind of prohibitive based off of how much you have to spend for photos for stories. The last two on the bottom, Creative Commons, Wiki Commons. I have used some in the past. They have what I like is you can search based on permissions. So you can go through and set the filter to be what's in the public domain, or what's or what doesn't have an attribution necessary. So you're not having to worry about the permissions for those photos. If they're in the public domain, they're in the public domain for you to use. So those are some options that you can use. If possible, especially like even in the public domain photos on Creative Commons, they typically list the photographer. You can never go wrong at giving attribution. It's kind of common courtesy, but if you are buying a license for something, like we just took some photos from PSI, and I wasn't part of the licensing, but I'm not sure. I would venture that there is something in that agreement about attribution. So if you're getting a license for photos, or you're using something, you always ask about permissions and if there needs to be attribution given, and what that attribution should look like.
All right, so now some just tips and tricks. Chris, did you want to do the first two?
Yeah. Okay. So this I won't harp on this too much because we're coming up on time, but really think about the story you want to tell with the photo. You've spent all the time thinking about how you want it written out. Devote as much time as to how you want to tell the story with the photos, because the photos aren't just something that you slap in. Well, I mean, they can be if you're just trying to add some photos, but they can really expand your story and round it out. So you should put as much time into thinking about how the photo will help tell the story as you do with the words you're writing down. And then I'll say, I've said it numerous times before, I'll say it, be intentional. If you're making the choice, make the choice, know why you're doing it. People will tell if something is people can tell if something is just kind of there. So just know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
And then, so knowing that you probably will need some sort of visual component for each story that you have, whether it's photos or videos or both, or some sort of graphic or something. But I like to ask about photos during the story interview at the end. So sometimes people already have some great pictures. Maybe they've had a photographer come already, or something like they had, family pictures or something with that. It's just nice to ask. And then a lot of times they'll say, oh yeah, hey, I do have some. And then I'll say, hey, can you send them my way and we can take a look. So I don't guarantee them after I ask for the photos that we will be using them. We might still have to look into taking our own pictures or coordinating with somebody else to take pictures, because they're not always up to their standards, aren't always up to like our standards for our stories. But it's nice to at least ask, because I've had some good ones come in from them already, and it saves you a step if they do have some great ones. And then of course provide credits where credit is due. And then we talked about this a little bit, but keep social media in mind when you're actually taking the pictures, which can be used in a post. How will they look within the post? Can they be added to different formats like Instagram stories and stuff like that, especially if you're doing the social media posting yourself too, writing the story and then posting it on social media.
And we added this slide in just because we saw a couple questions about permissions coming into this. So we added this in to kind of touch on it. Much like with the attribution, you can never go wrong with getting a photo release signed. One of my teachers in college used to say, it's the thing you don't need until you need it. And when you need it, when you need it and you don't have it, it's a problem. So it's never a bad thing to get a photo release signed when going out. It just kind of helps cover you in the back end if something were to come up. This is a kind of it gets not messy, but like if you're going to an event, like if you're covering an event for somebody, a lot of times those events have a kind of umbrella one written in, so just being known about that. But again, it never hurts for you to have your own copy of it. And then in the field, this can get really, really complicated in the field if you're a one-person show. So if you're taking the photos and having to worry about it, it can get really, really complicated really fast, especially if it's a very large event. So that's why if you are planning on taking some of these forms to an event and having someone sign them, it is probably beneficial to you to bring someone to kind of handle that. Or you can work with the person coordinating the event to have them signed up front when people check in, and then you gather them afterwards. Or you collect them at the end of the event so that anyone who came in has already signed them. In my past job, we used to film a lot at like elementary schools for charity events. And one of the things that we had to do was, if there were some students who were given permission and some who weren't, there was a part of the room dedicated, like not a corner, but basically like a side of the room where the kids who did not have permission were kind of grouped together, so that all the photographers knew, don't film any of the kids in this corner, like aim cameras this way. And so just, it's good practice to do it. Generally, we film a lot with our own people, whether it's faculty, staff, and that's not as much a worry. But I will say, it's good practice to have these forms on hand, and you will never go wrong having one get signed.
All right, so any questions that anyone has? I'll check the chat too here.
Best practices for framing. Christian, I think your video, do you, when you mean the edges of the photograph, what do you mean?
Yeah, hi, Chris. So I mean, like when you're taking the picture and you're mentioning composition, what would be best practice, kind of like to avoid, example, say you have the composition you like, but then you're not sure about the edges of the shot. What's like, like what are some rule of thumbs to avoid like cutting anything?
Yeah.
Sort of like that, yeah.
Emma, could you go back to that selfie I took?
Oh yeah, hold on.
So the with that one is, it almost never, I'm not going to say never, almost never cut off somebody's head. Like don't put the framing here. Give them a little bit of space above their head. That's generally one that you want to be conscious of. The same kind of goes like if you're photographing a person, kind of break them up into proportions. So we're thinking like here, like this is a close-up, like that's a close-up of me. You see I've got some headroom there. Then you can kind of dial out to like a medium shot, and we're talking like probably like here, using the natural line of my waist to kind of cut me off. It's how you kind of think about it. And then if I were to go further back, I only have so much space here. But like if I were to go here, this wouldn't be optimal because I'm kind of cut off at the knees. Once you get to this portion, you want to kind of keep going back to get the full person. You don't want to unnaturally cut people off.
Okay. Yeah.
If you're thinking about landscape wise, use the natural spaces to kind of help dictate your framing. So like with this photo, you see the horizon line just kind of naturally up on that upper third.
Right.
Use the space to your advantage, and then move yourself through the space to kind of get the framing you want. Try getting higher, try getting lower. You can do like a little like half squat just to get that right framing to get the person with the head, the appropriate amount of headroom. But just don't be afraid to look like a fool as the photographer. because, you know, you always see the photos on social media that are like the photographer versus the photo. And the photographers are always like, you know, upside down, backwards on the ground, and you see the photo and it's incredible. But the photographer in the moment looks like a fool. So don't be afraid to kind of put yourself in unusual positions. Be safe. Like, you know, don't like climb out on a ledge or anything, but just, you know, be safe, but you know, try different angles, put yourself in different positions to kind of see, you know, what it gives you in the photo.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Emma, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, so best practices for alt text. I can go over it a little bit, but there's a lot of information online about this too, and how to best write it. So something simple. My understanding is that it's not best to use names and stuff in it, but instead describe the image better. So it's basically with a screen reader. If it just has a name, then it's hard to understand like what's actually going on in the picture. So make sure that you're describing it short and sweet. You don't necessarily have to worry about keywords and stuff in there. Google does, to my understanding, prefer, they will, I'm trying to think of the word here. They prefer when an image does have alt text, so it helps it perform better too, like in Google and stuff. But it is important, and there's a lot of online resources. So I guess I would direct you that way, just to read through all of them. So they can probably explain it better, better than I can, besides just simple, short, and explain.
And say also like concise, like
yes.
tell as much information in as few words.
Yes, of course. And we saw some questions in the registration about like file size and uploading into WordPress. I didn't go into this too much, but if a picture is really large, or the file size is really large, WordPress won't take it. And I had to learn this the hard way and trying to figure out why it wasn't uploading. But if, for example, when you look in, let's say you download a picture and you have it in like your file finder or something, you can see what size the picture is. So if it says something like 3,000 by like 7,000, that's a very big exaggeration. But if it's a really big file size, WordPress will tell you that it's too big. And in that case, that's when I would go and resize in either Photoshop or Canva, like I like to use, to a normal size. And in that case too, it usually won't distort the image or anything like that if you do it the right way, and it pulls in both directions, both the length and the height of it. That's when the distorting happens for that. So if it's a normal file size, and on the lower end around the 1500 844 plus, probably a little bit bigger, you should be fine. I'm looking at here too, let's see. Does that answer your question? Anyone about the file sizes and uploading? Okay. Let's see.
Also the 1500 by 844 we also use when we upload to YouTube for custom thumbnail, and that typically falls under like, YouTube won't let a photo size bigger than like 2 megabytes. And when we resize it to go into WordPress, it actually almost always falls within that, under that range. So that sort of gives you a little bit of sense of size. There's one other thing, I don't think I mentioned it when I was talking about permissions, but permissions and copyright, I tend to care, I care a lot about as someone who's had some of their work taken in the past without permission, and it does suck. And the thing you hear a lot of people say a lot of times is, oh, it's free advertising for you, and that's not a thing. Like, you know, respect people, respect their work. You know, people, if you ask people to share things, odds are people are inclined to share it or work with you to do it. So just, if you're talking with a photographer on this, that's at the shoot, and you want to, you know, work with them to get photos, talk to them, figure out what they're doing, be upfront about what you're using the photos for. If you're doing it for purely for like educational purposes, they may be inclined to let you use them. It's just be upfront with people about what you want to use them for, talk with them. and be honest. So if you tell someone that you're using it for a certain purpose, like an educational purpose, but then you use it in advertising for a program, those are different things. And that can burn bridges, relationships. It can create some kind of potentially like some kind of legal trouble if it was used out of the purpose that was stated when it was shared. There's actually like, you know, if you get with like professional photographers, they have different licenses based on what you want to use the image for. So just, you know, err on the side of attribution, be upfront with people, be honest, and you'll be surprised of how many people are willing to work with you through what you want to use photos for.
Yeah, just ask them how they prefer to be credited and stuff like that. Any other questions? All right, well, be sure to tune in if you're interested in learning more about Canva and the design part of it, social media, stories, stuff like that. One of our graphic designers, Leanne, and our social media specialist, Adrian, will be leading the next month's workshop. Do you have the date, Chris?
I believe that is May 13th.
Yes, so if you're interested at all, be sure to join us.
Thank you all for joining us today. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. If you joined in late, there will be a posted recording of this